morning. This is the Morning History Show for May 26, 2023. I'm Dr. Sean Munger. I am a historian, author, and teacher. I teach history at a number of different levels. I've done it here on YouTube, on my website, and in person. And today's stories on the pod involve a set of Bronze Age bones found on one of the Channel Islands. I'm going to be talking about a medieval wharf in Norway and a World War II era shipwreck in the waters off of Okinawa. So this is technically the first episode, I guess, of Morning History Show, but I'd like this show to be kind of a regular thing where I talk about historical developments in the news, various items out there that cross my radar. I've done several demo episodes, so I'm kind of used to it already, but this is the first one that's going to reach the public. So I hope you enjoy the show. Many people start their day with news, which these days can be very depressing and triggering. And so my idea for this show was to have a way to maybe start the day or end the day, depending on where you are, not with news, but with some bits of history. And it's my hope that maybe you can learn something. Okay, our first story for today. The BBC is reporting in the last couple of days that archaeologists have discovered a skeleton on Longis Common on the island of Alderney, which dates back about 3,500 years to the Bronze Age. So Alderney, in case you don't know, I had to look it up, it's one of the Channel Islands. The more famous, there's a couple of Channel Islands. The more famous ones are Jersey and Guernsey. And as you might expect, these lie in the waterway between France and England in the western part of the English Channel. So they are a British Crown dependency and have been for a very long time. Longis was a settlement on the southeast part of this island of Alderney. And the Romans built a fort there during their occupation of Britain. The fort was probably built around the year or sometime in the 300s CE. And archaeologists have been doing pretty intensive work on this site for many years. And apparently, like a lot of ancient sites, the Longis Common, that's where the skeleton was found, it's sort of a layer cake. So there's a burial ground dating from the Iron Age, or what researchers thought dated from the Iron Age, about 1200 BCE to 550 BCE. That was on the bottom. Then there was a Roman fort built on top of that, and it's my understanding that a lot of pottery from the Roman era has been discovered there. Just to put this in perspective, the Iron Age is roughly about the time that Homer's Odyssey takes place, where he's coming back from the wars and the intensive phase of what we kind of lumped together under the name of ancient Greece was going on at this time. So that's the Iron Age. But what's significant here in this discovery is that the skeleton was found here, but researchers think it's about 3,500 years old. That significantly predates the beginning of the Iron Age. And what it proves is that Alderney was inhabited earlier than historians thought. This is pretty interesting because Alderney is pretty far off the beaten path. You might want to look it up on Google Maps. You'd be surprised where it is. So to understand that people were living there so long ago, again, 3,500 years ago, that's pretty interesting. And it suggests that there was a robust migration and sea trade and cultural contact going on in a period where it seems kind of harder for us intuitively to imagine that happening at this time. But, there it is. There's these bones here, and clearly there was a settlement there. People, buried their dead in a respectful way and that sort of thing. So, there was a community there. Most Americans are, I'm sure it's different in the UK, but you can tell from my accent I'm American. Most Americans are surprised to learn that the Channel Islands even exist. This is sort of a limbo zone between France and England, and the Channel Islands were famously occupied by the Germans during World War II. I understand there has more recently been a constitutional crisis on the island of Jersey, but the German occupation, a lot has been written on that. The German occupation became more prominent in the last couple of years through the 2018 film The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, directed by Mike Newell, who directed one of the Harry Potter films based on a novel from 2008. So that brought the Channel Islands into the consciousness of a lot of people who had never heard of them before. But anyway, Alderney is one of those Channel Islands, and its history goes way, way back, long before World War II era. And this skeleton discovery, I think, underscores just the long history that these islands have, and that they were wired into the whole trade and cultural network of early Europe. Again, we're talking 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, so that's a long time. Okay. A second story also involves a discovery, an archaeological excavation. This is in Norway. The Norwegian Institute for Cultural Heritage Research has recently been publicizing some work that they've been doing in Oslo Harbor, specifically a structure called the King's Wharf at a site called Bjørvika. By the way, the stories that I'm going to enumerate in this show, I'm going to put all the links in the description, so if you want to see more about them, that's where you can find them. Anyway, the existence of remains of a big wooden wharf in Oslo Harbor, of course, Wharf, W-H-A-R-F, I'm not talking about the Star Trek character, but a big wharf, although that would be amusing. A big wharf in Oslo Harbor has been known about since the 1990s, but there's been a new excavation. There's been excavation going on for years, but a recent excavation uncovered a much larger section of preserved timber from a wharf structure, a really huge wharf structure. It's many, many meters in length. And spatially, the location of this is important. Spatially, the wharf is on a straight line with what was called the King's Estate in Oslo in the 12th and 13th century, so High Middle Ages. And a bunch of medieval boats, more than 40 of them, have been found in this area, the remains of boats, also anchors from ships that traded here, so clearly there was a lot of sea trade going on here. Archaeologists, I found this detail real interesting. Archaeologists have found a lot of mussel shells, and apparently those are from a type of mussel that only lives in water whose composition was different at that time. They could not survive there today, but this is clear evidence that the water composition in the Middle Ages in Oslo Harbor was significantly different than it is today, which I guess is not surprising. So the dock was apparently, part of it had been known about before, but they found much more of it, and the larger section that they found was apparently buried during a landslide in the late 14th or early 15th century. Now, there's kind of a sad postscript to this discovery because once discovered, the big logs of the wharf cannot be preserved. So they've been under landfill for all this time. They've been excavated and they start to decay immediately. And the Norwegian government does not have the resources to preserve these ancient logs, much less the money to do that. So guess what? These huge medieval logs, the foundation of this old structure, are simply being thrown away once the archaeologists find any preservable artifacts in this area and kind of filter those out. So they have taken samples of the wood to submit to analysis for dendrochronology. That involves the study of tree rings. So they're going to find out when these logs were cut, probably in the early Middle Ages, that kind of thing. So medieval Oslo, I did a little bit of poking into this, very different than the modern city. And it was of course, it was called Christiania before it was called Oslo. And it was extensively replanned and rebuilt after a major fire in 1624. So Oslo Christiania pre-1624, very different than post-1624. And I always wondered why Oslo, which was and is a major trading port in Scandinavia and was in medieval times, I always wondered why Oslo didn't have a Bryggen, like the famous complex of trading houses and wharves in Bergen, Norway. Probably butchering the pronunciation. Bryggen spelled Bryggen. That complex, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site in Bergen, contains the old Hanseatic contour. Those are those triangular buildings fronting the waterfront that involved lots of trade and financial activity and that sort of thing. But of course, Bergen was a Hanseatic League city, and Oslo was not, if I recall correctly. I think that's true, but correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But apparently, this 1624 fire is why medieval Oslo has not been preserved the way that medieval Bergen and its successors have been. Archaeologists have been working hard in the past couple of years to excavate and preserve Oslo's medieval past to the extent they can. I know one of the other things they've found are timbers from the old center street, which was apparently covered in logs, and they found some of those. So that kind of work is still going on. There's an extensive article on this from a website called sciencenorway.no. Of course, it's linked in the description, but there's much, much more there than I can give you here just in this capsule summary. Okay, final story for this morning, shifting now to World War II. On April 12th, 1945, which incidentally was the same day that President Franklin Roosevelt died of a cerebral hemorrhage. This is not about that, but anyway, same day, April 12, 1945, during the height of the Battle of Okinawa, a destroyer called the USS Manert L. Abelie came under attack about 75 miles off the northern coast of Okinawa. And that afternoon, the Abelie was hit by a Japanese Zero fighter on a kamikaze attack. And then just 1 minute later, it was hit by a special-built Japanese kamikaze weapon called a cherry blossom, or oha. The ship blew up and went down immediately, killing 84 sailors. 2 days ago, the New York Times reported, or I guess 3 days ago now, the New York Times reported that a civilian exploration group called the Lost 52 Project announced that they had discovered the wreck of the Manert L. Abelie off the coast of Okinawa. The discovery apparently happened in December. They're just now reporting it. But they found the wreck of the ship. It was broken in half, and it's in about 4,500 feet of water down in the Pacific off of Okinawa. And this group, which I had never heard of before, Lost 52 Project, their mission is to explore and discover World War II era shipwrecks, particularly submarines. They are not involved in salvage. I mean, they're not bringing stuff up from the bottom of the ocean. There's no plans to dive on the wreck or anything like that. Obviously, at this depth, 4,500 feet, you're going to have to use, if you wanted to get anything from these wrecks, you'd have to use robot submersibles and that sort of thing. But they're not doing that. They consider these war graves. But they are finding them, surveying them, that kind of thing. With my understanding is that they're using remote underwater vehicles to image the seafloor. That's what I think is going on here. So just historical context, kamikazes, most people have heard of those. They were a devastating tactic that the Japanese used in the closing months of World War II. As their resources were running out, the Japanese would fly planes and sometimes custom-built, like kind of more flying bombs than planes, but they would send these out at U.S. ships. These were suicide missions. The pilots, of course, were killed. And the results of these attacks were catastrophic. The damage of kamikaze attacks was far greater than anything that could be inflicted with conventional weapons alone. And the Japanese targeted transport and support ships, supporting the U.S. invasion, as well as warships. So there are, in fact, on my YouTube channel, some of my videos include clips of a kamikaze strike on the USS Tennessee, a battleship, in 1945. I'm surprised that the YouTube content guidelines allow me to show that. I know it's in, I believe, my video on the USS California, but you can see just how devastating a kamikaze attack, what it looks like, and it's pretty horrendous. The Battle of Okinawa itself was horrendous. Most Americans don't appreciate today just how bloody and awful this battle was. Months of ferocious fighting on land as well as at sea, some of the bloodiest in all of World War II. And this battle lasted from April to June of 1945, so toward the very end. Okinawa was the last of the big islands to be taken by U.S. forces before the projected invasion of the home islands, Operations Olympic and Coronet, which were supposed to kick off in, I believe, November 1945 and February 1946, if I have that correct. But, of course, that didn't happen. Okinawa, in fact, the experience there played a role in Truman's decision to drop the atomic bomb on Japan. The Battle of Okinawa was a dress rehearsal for just how awful the invasion of Japan was going to be, both for Americans and especially for Japanese. Like, probably tens of millions would have been killed during this operation if it had gone off. And the Okinawa experience is possibly an underappreciated factor in the decision to drop the atomic bomb. I generally do not debate. I have no desire to debate the atomic bomb decision. I find that debate entirely ahistorical and not really useful in the modern world. It was made back in 1945 under tremendously different circumstances than the way most people debate it today. So not really a useful debate in my opinion, but Okinawa is part of that story. So kind of more on topic, the ocean is littered with World War II era wrecks. Most of them are unsurveyed or unidentified. Kind of a lot of them are cargo ships and that sort of thing. And the deep ocean is so vast, people don't really understand just how hard it is to find anything on the bottom of the ocean, especially if it's very, very deep and far from land. So that's why these discoveries are significant when they're made. The ship, the destroyer Manert L. Abele, was commissioned on July 4th, 1944, part of the big buildup of military assets that the U.S. built for the end of the war. And it was named, there was a person, Manert L. Abele, as I'm sure you might imagine. He was the commander of the U.S. submarine USS Grunion, which sank in late July or early August 1942 in the Bering Sea. That wreck was later discovered. The later generation of U.S. Navy ships in World War II were often named for personnel lost in the early part of World War II. So if you see that trend in the naming conventions of Navy ships, it's kind of interesting. It shows kind of the two waves of American materiel in World War II, where the early part of the war was often fought with weapons and ships and such that existed on hand when we entered the war. And then the later part of World War II was a major push with stuff that was purposely built during the war. And so we kind of finished out on that. I know I mentioned that also in one of my recent videos, and I can't remember which one. Anyway, nautical subjects, shipwrecks, etc. are hoped to be a big part of this podcast, so I am going to take notice of them as they come across my radar screen. Okay, so that's all for today. So I hope you enjoyed and learned something, and I hope you have a great day, a great Friday. This is a holiday weekend in the United States, I believe in Canada as well. So I hope you have a great holiday weekend, and I will return again soon with some more Morning History Show. So thanks very much. Bye.